Hello, friends, and welcome to Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast. This is your host, Kira Drogue, signing on for another episode of exploration, adventure, fun, and, dare I say it, mystery. In today's episode, we'll chat with special guests Brian and Joan McFarlane. Brian is the son of the very first Hardy Boys author, Leslie McFarlane. And Brian joins us today to discuss his history with the Hardy Boys, talk about his father and his written works, and consider the legacy his father has left us through the Hardy Boys. Friends, it is an incredible honor to be joined today by Brian McFarlane, Canadian television sportscaster, author, artist, and son of Leslie McFarlane, the man who wrote the very first Hardy Boys books. Brian is best known as a broadcaster on Hockey Night in Canada, broadcasting for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Montreal Canadians, and Winnipeg Jets between 1960 and 1995. For his efforts, Brian was admitted into the media section of the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1995 and received the Order of Canada in 2020. Brian has published over 75 books on hockey that have sold well over 1 million copies and range from fiction to nonfiction to memoirs. Brian and his wife Joan, who joins us as well today, have been married for over 60 years. Now, at 94 years old, Brian spends his days writing, painting, and enjoying time with his grandchildren, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And with that, I'm so excited to welcome you here, Brian. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's so funny because the Hardy Boys have been such a fundamental part of my life. And the way I've researched and studied and talked about them to get to talk to you, who's so intrinsically connected with that history, is just, it means a lot to me. So I'm really glad that you're here. I will start off with a question that we kind of chatted about last time we talked, but I was hoping you could talk about the first time that you encountered the Hardy Boys. Was that, out, quote unquote, out in the wild? Was that, at home with your dad? What did that experience kind of look like for you?
Well, as I recall, I was about 10 years old, and he had an office in our little house in Ottawa, and a study that was about size of a small bathroom, it seemed to me, because it was cluttered with books everywhere and manuscripts, and an Underwood typewriter on a little desk. And there was no door. He couldn't shut out all the kids running around the house and using the bathroom upstairs down the hall from his office. And I admired him for being able to tune out everything and go to work and just concentrate on what he was writing. And I've inherited that trait, I think, because I'm able to tune out people when they're running around me and go to work. So I guess I entered his study, so the story goes, one day, and there was a group of Hardy Boys books behind him, like there is behind you at the moment. And I said, "Dad, did you read those books growing up?" And he said, "No, I wrote them." I guess I was stunned because I still remember it. And I said, and he said, "Well, they're not worthy of much attention anyway," or something like. He dismissed them. And I said, "Dad, we're all reading them. All the guys in my neighborhood were reading Hardy Boys books and exchanging them to save money on buying a new book." And so I told him this, and he looked a little surprised. And later on, I guess he went into Eaton's store in Toronto and went to their publishing section, and he noticed a bunch of Hardy Boys books on the shelves there. And that convinced him that he was writing something that people were interested in. And I guess it surprised him because he once declared the Hardy Boys rubbish. It's an old-fashioned word, but he told a correspondent or someone he met down in Florida, "Oh, that rubbish." And the man wrote it down because he said, "Here, the author of the Hardy Boys invited me to lunch in Florida, And he had just bought some Hardy Boys books, and the author sitting across from me saying, well, they're not very important. They're rubbish, in my opinion. I had to write them because I needed the money. And he told them the story of how we were a little desperate, I guess, although the kids in the family, the three of us, never felt that we were impoverished. But he needed money to pay the rent. He never bought a house in his life. He never bought a car in his life. And he dismissed the Hardy Boys and went on to other things that he thought were much more important. And I guess in a way they were. But that was the start of it. And if you have any questions about it from there on, well, go forward.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting for me, to think about the significant impact that the Hardy Boys have had on your life growing up as, you know, from that moment when you learned that your dad was the original author of the Hardy Boys. And I feel like even though your path took you definitely, down a different route into the world, the wonderful, fabulous, very busy world of hockey. There's still that tie back to the Hardy Boys always. What sticks with you most about being the son of the original Franklin W. Dixon?
Well, I was quite proud of it, frankly. I thought that that was wonderful that he was writing the Hardy Boys that all the kids were reading. It gave me a little notoriety in our community, but
I believe it.
not to the point where it was discussed over the dinner table, certainly not our table. And it was digested, and yeah, we were the family of the Hardy Boys, but so what? I mean, we were more concerned about the baseball game going on down the park that we were missing because of dinner or something of like that nature, or maybe the movie in the Rialto Theater on Main Street. Um, we just took it as part of living and part of growing up. And our dad was a little different than the other fathers in the neighborhood, certainly, because there weren't too many men making a living out of freelance writing back in 1929 or 30. In fact, the Depression was at its height, and they were really desperate to sell their stuff. My dad was selling a lot of hockey knit fiction, which attracted my attention to the pulp magazines of the day. And today's kids won't have any idea what pulp magazines were, but they were printed on cheap paper. They sold for 10 or 15 cents. And they were filled with either detective stories or sports stories. And he was able to sell dozens of his sports short stories to the magazines for 20 bucks or 30 bucks or whatever he could get. And occasionally McLean's magazine would call him and he'd do a profile of some player for them, or other magazines that are no longer in existence in the States. And along the way, of course, he was always given an assignment to do a next Hardy Boys books. And the assignment came from a man named Stratmeyer, who lived in New Jersey, just across the river from New York City. And he and his family established the Stratmeyer Syndicate. So he started off by writing juvenile fiction for kids, boys and girls. I think the Bobbsey twins may have been his first. And there were, the Dave Fearless series comes to mind because that was the first book my dad contracted to write for Mr. Stratmeyer. And I think the terms were 85 bucks for a book or $100 and no royalties, because Stratmeyer discovered if he put a pen name to a book instead of Leslie McFarlane, if it came as F.W. Dixon, who did not exist, but if it made him exist and he could keep all the royalties, he didn't have to pay. If Leslie McFarlane got angry with him and decided he wanted $400 for a book, he could say, well, Les, I can get a guy down at the newspaper to write the same sort of stuff for $100. he could dismiss his authors if there was ever any friction between them. Well, there never was with my dad because he dismissed the books anyway. He just wrote them to get the $100 and get the damn book in 3 weeks. And he told me he never reread one of the Hardy Boys books to see if it still held up after 20 years. So
Wow.
he was never engaged as prominently with the books as he might have been. So that surprised me as well, because most authors, they look at their first book and they can't, they're so proud they want every family member to read it and tell them how good it was and how it kept them awake at night. So he never had that, and never got to enjoy that experience.
That's so interesting because there's so much, I want to say, like there's so much flavor to those books. Like when I read, I remember the first time. So I grew up reading the Blueback Hardy Boys books, and I walked into a pawn shop in my like second year of my undergraduate degree, and I don't even remember what I was looking for. I was looking for something, and I came across one of these Hardy Boys books, and I was like, that, it was different. And as someone that has always loved the Hardy Boys, I was like, oh, maybe it's like a unique edition. I'll bring it home. And I brought it home with, I think it was like $20. I brought it home with me, and I sat down. I was like, it's going to feel so cool to read, an older version of it. And it was one of the storylines that had changed after the editorial rehaul in the 50s. And I remember after I finished reading it, I closed the book and I just sat. And I don't think I moved for like 35 minutes because it took me that long to just realize that I got to have the experience that very few people do, and that they got to meet I got to meet my childhood heroes all over again, the way they were written originally. And it was such a powerful moment. And I think that was kind of where I started my journey into like studying and researching the Hardy Boys, because there was something in those stories that your dad told that was so much more powerful and real and flavorful than, the books that I had still loved and read as a child. And that's one of the reasons that I have so many of them here behind me, is because I want to go back and I want to be able to enjoy all of those originals as he wrote them.
Well, I want to respond by saying if my dad was here to listen to what you just said, he would have a huge smile on his face, and he would be so proud that somebody in the world
Aw.
recognized the Hardy Boys for what they were. They were a license for young men and girls all over the world, not just Canada or North America, to learn the joy of reading. And that's his legacy, more than anything else that he did. And he did some wonderful things. He produced films with no real background in learning how to film things, documentaries for the National Film Board. One was nominated for an Academy Award, and he wrote a variety. He wrote novels. He wrote for kids. He wrote sports novels and mystery novels, and and yet he's more known now for the Hardy Boys than, yeah, I claim that of all the Canadian writers, he outsold all of them with close to 100 million, or maybe more than 100 million copies of the Hardy Boys over the last 100 years. And this is the anniversary year for it, isn't it? 1925 or seven.
Yeah, so it's 1927. So it's The Tower Treasure came out in June of 1927.
So they're close to 100 years. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's something that I'm very proud of him for leaving, because I've encountered I encountered him, a man on he was in Florida buying a book for his nephew, who was a slow learner and a slow reader, and he bought a Hardy Boys book, as you did, with the old original version, and
Mm-hmm.
paid 50 cents for it, or 20 cents, and gave it to his nephew. And the nephew got hooked on reading, and that triggered a response that led him right into adulthood with reading the Hardy Boys. What amazes me about you is that most readers gave up the Hardy Boys books in their teens and went on to better stuff. Um, and there weren't I can't I haven't encountered a woman who has kept the collection going as you have, or the proximity to the Hardy Boys and their rollicking tales of the years ago. Um, so that really surprised me, and I'm very pleased you did that. As I say, my dad would have a big smile on his face as you just mentioned it.
Oh, that makes my heart so happy. And it is funny because I'll like scoot sideways a little bit. I do have my Nancy Drews down here as well. I'm the older sibling. I have a younger brother, and my grandparents started by as soon as we were the right age. I got Nancy Drew for my birthday. My brother Liam got the Hardy Boys for his birthday. And I love Nancy Drew. There was a little bit more peril in the Hardy Boys, and I appreciated that. And my brother, he's more of a fantasy reader. He read them, he enjoyed them. You know, he did as most kids do. Read it once, okay, it's on the bookshelf, now to look pretty. And when I still lived at home, I think I was like 10 or 12, and I'd wait till he was out of the house, and I'd sneak in and I'd grab one random one. And then it would make its way over to my bookshelf. It would show up a couple of days later. And eventually, before he knew it, and he didn't realize, all of the books ended up on my bookshelf so I could keep reading them. And then when I moved out, he was helping me carry boxes. And, you know, I've labeled them the Hardy Boys. And he goes, "Aren't those mine?" And I was like, "Well, not anymore. They're coming with me."
Did you get the editions with the what am I going to call it, the illustrations on the cover instead of a hard cover? There was another cover that covered the cover with an illustration of
The dust jacketed versions.
dust.
I wish. No, I started with the ones they were printed around. I'm gonna age myself here. I want to say they started printing in the early 2000s.
Yes. Okay. Well, he may have glanced at those because I think he dismissed them. I think he felt a little hurt that they'd taken his original version of the books and he'd added Aunt Gertrude as a special visitor to the Hardy Boys, and she
Mm-hmm.
really replaced their mother as the feminine interest of great interest in the books. And Aunt Gertrude was one of his creations, and he dabbled in creating a little more quality to the books than he had observed in the Dave Fearless series. How do you feel when you're writing about a guy walking around the ocean bottom looking for a treasure? He would never find it, of course, but in Dave Fearless books, well, they'd find the ship that sunk and the treasure was there, and they'd rescue it, and whatever. And he said, I didn't really like writing the Dave Fearless stuff, but the Hardy Boys intrigued me because they were fresh and different. And they were two boys going to school like everybody else and playing sports and having a mystery happen almost every week in their lives. Uh, and he said, I tried to put a little more quality into the books, a little word here or there that may challenge a reader to go to their mother and say, what does mystique mean, Mom? I read it in the Hardy Boys. He was challenging. And I think that was a good thing that happened because we all run into words in every stage of life that we don't understand. We have to ask somebody or look it up. And he did that. Um, he never had any control over the artwork on the covers or anything of that nature. And he'd get a 2 or 3 page outline of the next book, and he'd plunge in and he make changes here or there if he didn't like what they were doing, driving too fast on the highway or whatever. Dusty roads, rather, back then, no highways. And I think a lot of it was based on Haileybury, Ontario, where we grew up, and there were only dusty roads and very few paved roads. And we had the freedom to run our bikes 2 miles into the woods and come across a cave or a stream or a strange animal or whatever. And the Hardy Boys connection was very much connected, I think, to the childhood of the McFarlane kids and other kids who lived in Haileybury.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to visit, getting to see kind of where the idea of Bayport came to be.
Well, it's too bad you weren't aware of a special reunion we had a few years ago. Joan and I drove up for the weekend, and they honored my father at a dinner, and that was at the golf course. I had to get up and make a speech, and so did many others. And the Hardy Boys connection was honored, and we're thrilled that they still claim that Haileybury is the home of Leslie McFarlane. Um, and aside to that story was that when my father passed, he left certain things to certain individuals, and my nephew was given his typewriter that he wrote the Hardy Boys on, and he kept it for many years. And then they opened the Haileybury Museum, and my nephew generously donated the typewriter to the museum. Within the last couple of years, my daughter, you can't fool her. She found out that the typewriter was not the original one anymore, the one her son donated. And someone has stolen or taken off with the typewriter in the museum and replaced it with an old Underwood, I believe. And Nora had a photo of the original with the keys the way they were shaped,
Mm-hmm.
all that. And she's very upset that they allowed that to happen. They didn't have much security, or somebody. It's a mystery only the Hardy Boys could solve, I think, if they tackled it, if they were around.
Nora was
Yeah, Nora is my sister. She's 92, and she's written some wonderful works too along the way. Yeah, and my daughter's
That's amazing.
a screenwriter. My daughter's an excellent screenwriter, playwright rather, not screenwriter, playwright. She's even produced a show on Broadway, off Broadway.
Oh, wow.
So she's venturesome, and she's won awards for best play in the Toronto. I've forgotten the name of the competition they have every year. Um, we're getting, the two of us in our mid 90s are finding that the vagaries of the 90s are real. You do forget things. You remember them 1 minute and lose them a minute later, and then you reclaim your memory a minute after that. So conversations are kind of funny with the people we deal with, and we don't have any old friends to deal with anymore. Most of them have passed on. So we're making friends with the generation that follows, people that are in our daughter's age bracket, and they're 60,
Mm-hmm.
70. And we're having fun with a young couple now that we go to dinner with about once a week, and their values and lifestyle is so much different than ours is, but we enjoy each other's company, and they learn from us, and we learn a lot from them.
Oh, that's lovely. That's so wonderful. And it's hearing about all the different writers in your family and how that has, you know, that love of literature and reading and writing and sharing stories has continued through generations.
Yeah.
It means a lot. I was reading one of your interviews from 2018. It was one of the ones that you had sent me. And something that you said in that really stuck with me, and I was hoping you could talk about it a little further in terms of, you know, your writing process. Is you said, "I don't pretend to be a great writer, but I make it simple and tell the stories the way people tell me their stories."
Yes. I well, it makes it so much easier if I'm talking to Bobby Orr, which I have from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
They're interested in what Orr says about any subject, whether it's hockey or living in Boston or whatever. And it was the same when I was on television. I find that the sooner you get to your guest in the intermission, you've only got 3 minutes for them. You don't spend the first minute backing up what he did on the ice for the last 40 seconds or asking him how his marriage is going or anything. You go right to the subject. You say, what happened on that play in that period when the guy dumped you over the boards and then he laughed at you and you get up and punched him in the mouth? That's what they want to hear. And I criticize a lot of commentators for not getting to their guest sooner. That's one of the only complaints I have.
Oh, goodness. We were talking about writing and, writing in your family, and the sheer amount of writing that you've done is so spectacular, and it covers, so much, and there's so many stories that you've brought to life. How much of your writing style is inspired by equal parts, I guess, the work that you've done, but also, some of the things that maybe your dad taught you while you were growing up and finding your voice as a writer?
Well, the latter part of the question, absolutely nothing. He never
Really?
he never encouraged me. He never discouraged me. He did encourage my sister Nora. He said she's something special. She may become Canada's foremost novelist before, and she was winning awards when she was only 15 years old. And
Wow.
we were in high school together, and she got her picture in the paper one day in a big write up because she won first prize in a contest sponsored by 17 Magazine.
Oh, wow.
And that was big with teenagers back then. And she's
Mm-hmm.
a story, I can't remember the title, but there she is in the Ottawa Journal and the Citizen with a picture of herself at 15. And nobody had even cared about her writing ability. But she would write little poems when she was younger, and my dad would take them and cut them out and put them in the proper position and then mail them off to whatever sources he had. And she'd get a check for $2 in the mail if they printed her poem. And she I guess she made a few $2 deposits to her account. And I'm so glad I have a great relationship with my sister Nora. We talk on the phone, and she's got so many vivid memories of old things that I'd forgotten, and boyfriends and dances and hockey games and all of that stuff. I was the coach of the high school hockey team I played for, and they
Mm-hmm.
started a girls program. So they asked for girls to try out, and about 20 of them showed up on the rink on the back of the campus. And I had to make a selection of 10 or 12 of them for the hockey club. And my sister went and bought a hockey stick for 50 cents and came out and tried out. And I had to cut her from the team.
Oh,
I
uh-oh.
think she skated quite as fast as the other girls, and I often agonized over that. And I approached her a few years ago and said, Nora, for 40 years I've been carrying this problem around about cutting you from the team when we were glebe together. And she said, what are you talking about? I don't remember any of that. She had a bit of the Hardy Boys instincts in her, because she told me when she was the youngest sister, the little girl growing up, my older sister would caution her, don't go down that road because some people just moved in there and they're bad people. I don't want you going near them. She couldn't wait to get rid of her sister so she could run down and see these bad people. And
Um,
one
as soon as
couple,
somebody tells you not to do something,
yeah,
the immediate reaction is to want to do it.
one family kidnapped her. They moved to another location 30 miles away, and the moving van drove off with Nora up sitting next to the driver. And she said, I had a wonderful day. They were promising me hot dogs for dinner, and I love hot dogs. And my dad is going frantic. He didn't even own a car so he could chase after them. And he had to go through loops to find out where this place was. And he had to get a taxi to go there and rescue his daughter from these bad people. And she's saying, "Oh, I won't get any hot dogs now when I get home."
To stay with them.
So she's a marvelous storyteller, and you'll enjoy chatting with her.
Yeah, she's brilliant. She's really smart, just like him. They're all brilliant in this family.
I brought her down to college with me, and we graduated together.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But another girl, Donna Monroe, who's now my age, 94, um, we've become pen pals or email pals lately in the last 5 or 7 years because I wrote a story about her when I was coaching that team. We never scored a goal, by the way, in two games we played against Lisgar. But in the second game, she got knocked down and she spun around and then she jumped to her feet and the puck was right there and she skated right down the ice and scored a goal on
Yes.
on our own goalie.
Oh no.
Donna, you're going the wrong way, Donna. I wrote a little short story for kids called "Go Donna," because I talked to her on the phone. She said, "Brian, you don't know how devastated I was. I went in the clubhouse after that goal, and two kids jeered me for saying girls should be playing hockey, and I cried my eyes out. And there
Oh
was
no.
who chipped a tooth in the game. She was crying her eyes out too. And she said, I went home and I swore I would never go back to a hockey game again. And I quit the team and I cried my eyes out all
Oh
weekend.
no.
And finally, they convinced her to go back and she did play. But there was nothing after that for women. And when she heard I'd written a book called Go Donna, uh, we got corresponding, and I promised her I'd get it published someday, but I just haven't found the right publisher. So I'm thinking of self-publishing it, mainly for Donna's sake.
Absolutely. All of this talk about sports and hockey in particular, I'm trying to bring to mind all of the different sports that Frank and Joe Hardy played. And I don't think hockey was ever one of them.
No, they weren't. They weren't athletes. That's what surprises me. There's not much athleticism in the Hardy Boys books. There's always roadsters running down dirt roads, being chased by criminals, and sure, I'm surprised my dad, because he was a big hockey fan, and he wrote about. He was even a pioneer play-by-play announcer in Sault Ste. Marie one winter.
Wow.
But he didn't put much athleticism in those books, did he?
What did he tell you about your career?
Oh, he said, if you don't give up that hockey, you'll never amount to anything. It took me.
Ooh. I'm glad to know he was wrong.
Me too.
Let me tell you, you've done a lot.
Well, it's funny when I look back, because I was afraid I'd never amount to anything because I was playing so much hockey and skipping school. I could write my mother's signature on a letter, note to the teacher. I practiced.
Hey, it's an important skill to have.
But I got good enough at hockey that I got a scholarship offer to St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, a small college, and they were just starting out with a hockey program. My little junior team played a game there one night, and I guess I did well because the coach came over and said, how would you like to come here next year? I said, I'd really like it. I'd never conceived that I'd be college eligible. Well, I wasn't. I'd never graduated from high school. So they took a chance on me, and they told me that. They said, well, McFarlane, we're going to take a chance on you. It turned my whole life around. I met my wife the very first day I drove down there. Somebody drove me down there to go and they handed me a beanie that I didn't like to wear and a sign with my name on it to hang around my chest.
You were older than some of the boys.
And I was 20 years old by then, and the kids coming up from New Jersey and Long Island were going to bed crying because they were already homesick. And I had to show some solace and take them aside and say, just stick it out. You'll be fine. I'd been skating away from home to places like Stratford, Ontario, and living there in a boarding house and playing hockey 4 times a week. Um, so I was the elder statesman, I guess, and they made me the class president because I guess I
Aw,
He was class president every year that we went there. He was captain of
wow.
the team. He was valedictorian. He was everything in that year.
Question for you, Brian. Of all of, so like the Hardy Boys have been a really big part of your life. Is there one specific Hardy Boys story or like one specific book, one specific moment, something that, something that really sticks out to you?
You know, there really isn't. Um, it's so long ago since I read the Hardy Boys, like the Tower
Mm-hmm.
Danger, the House on the Cliff, the Phantom Freighter that somebody said my mother wrote, not my dad. And that's not true, by the way. My mother wouldn't. My sister and I, they agree that my mother never wrote one of the Hardy Boys books, and they don't know how that got in. There's there's visions of them driving down dusty roads and hiding in hidden places and a lot of adventure. Um, I did read through one of them years ago, and I felt it. No, not it doesn't grab me like it once did.
Mm-hmm.
But then, what does when you're growing up? You know, people don't buy Elvis Presley records much. So no, I don't think so. There's just an overall personal satisfaction with them that I didn't get from other series. Um, but I always thought he was the best hockey writer I'd ever read or adventure. The small
Mm-hmm.
towns of Canada where the coach does the right thing or something, you know. He was very good at writing novels like that or articles like that. Um, what more? No, I can't think of anything that stands out. One, I think he, I think he did each book at about the same level, you know, even though he was maybe discouraged and down and out. And the one book he probably was drinking too much that year, and didn't. My mother may have helped him get that finished, but she didn't write the words.
Mm-hmm.
No, just I was very proud of him that I was glad to find out that he was the author. We first talked, I was quite impressed. And of course, I mentioned the impression about your closeness with the Hardy Boys and following them and collecting books and all that. And you've got a master's in publishing. I'd never heard of a master's in publishing, but I'm thinking, is there room for a renewal of the Hardy Boys? Maybe I know they've had movie series about them, and is I just wondered if you would be at the forefront of a return of the Hardy Boys or somebody like them. I tried one.
That
I'll just finish by saying I tried once with a series called The Mitchell Brothers, and they sold reasonably well in Canada. I think not many countries other than Canada. And I thought they were reasonably good adult or teenage adventure stories for kids, and they were all about sports, not only hockey.
mm-hmm.
But but they weren't the Hardy Boys, and I just wondered if there are people phoning me from time to time, as I mentioned, about doing things, but I don't trust these people. I trust you, but
Aw.
you got something in mind other than just an interview like this one?
I think it's really funny that you ask this because I guess for some context, so I did do my master's in publishing. They offer that at Simon Fraser University. It's the only master's of publishing program in Canada. They take a maximum of 15 students a year. It's this really intensive absolutely amazing experience. And when I started my Master of Publishing, I went in with, I want to do my master's thesis on the Hardy Boys. And I walked into the program coordinator's office at the time, and I was like, hello, I have an idea. And just, here's my spiel on the Hardy Boys. And I remember he leaned back in his chair and he raised his hand and he's like, I think we need to set your expectations. And that, that might not happen. But what I actually ended up doing with my master's thesis, which is why I think it's apropos that you asked the question, is I worked with Simon & Schuster Canada, who owns the rights to the Hardy Boys characters. So the rights to the Hardy Boys are owned by two separate entities. Penguin Random House owns the rights to the original 58 books, and Simon & Schuster Canada owns the rights to the characters. So they're the only ones that can create new Hardy Boys stories. So I ended up meeting with and eventually working with then president and publisher at Simon & Schuster Canada, looking at the Hardy Boys and a potential reimagining of the Hardy Boys for their centennial anniversary. And that was my master's thesis, was getting to go in and look at sales data and look at, books for boys, detective series that had been inspired by the Hardy Boys and how those were selling, and, what modern audiences appreciated about the original Hardy Boys books versus, where they felt there would be room for some growth. And then, the bigger question of, does the world need a reimagined Hardy Boys series? And it was one of the coolest things I have ever done. I had so much fun diving into that history. So I have actually, started that conversation on some levels as to whether or not that might be a possibility. At this point, knowing how long things take in publishing, something, Brian, I'm sure you're very familiar with. My guess is that in advance of the centennial, there's probably not much hope that something's going to happen in that timeline. But I definitely wouldn't say it's not going to happen at all, because I do think that there's room for it. And there's a Canadian TV show, The Hardy Boys, that came out in 2020, that very much shows that ability to take, the characters and the essence of the Hardy Boys and bring it to life for modern audiences in a way that reflects the original, but also, brings in all those modern aspects that those younger readers and viewers are looking for, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Well, I think that's marvelous that you did this and showing that interest.
We've talked a lot about storytelling, and one thing that I'm really passionate about throughout all of this, and that I want to come really clearly through this podcast, is, this podcast overall is like, we're telling the story of the Hardy Boys, but we're also telling the story of all of the people that the Hardy Boys have impacted along the way. And I think that's why it's so important to be talking to folks like you, because, your stories, Hardy Boys related or otherwise, it all ties in so intrinsically to this legacy that the Hardy Boys are leaving behind. And it means so much. So, I mean, I will thank you again. This has been, I'm leaving today feeling really inspired. It means so much to be able to have these conversations and to know that, there's so much out there and so many people that the Hardy Boys have impacted through the years, and getting to hear those stories really, really warms my heart. So thank you.
Good luck to you and everything and all the endeavors you're through.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very impressive and we'll have to learn more about your side of the story, not just ours.
Already a friend, so that's good.
Thank you. And yes, I will. There's lots of stories to come, I promise.
Okay. Well, bye for now.
All right. Bye for now. Thank you so much. Friends, thank you for joining us here today. It's been such fun chatting with Brian and Joan McFarlane, and I want to take a moment to thank them again for their time, energy, and expertise. Until next time, this is Kira Drogue, host of Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, signing off. The absolutely stunning original theme music you've just enjoyed was composed by Jeff Lee. Sleuth Studies is grateful for the support of Volunteer Alberta, the Canadian Red Cross, the GloCal Foundation of Canada, and the Government of Canada. For more information about Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, please visit www.sleuthstudies.ca or find us on social media @Sleuth Studies.